Greetings to all students and viewers. Welcome back to this educational channel on biology. Today we will discuss the important organ which functions as the control center for activities in the human body. And of course, that is the brain. Of all the organs in the human body, the brain is the most complex. This most amazing and intelligent organ controls the various activities in the body and regulates biological processes with efficiency, whether we are asleep or awake. Among vertebrates, humans have one of the largest brains relative to body size. The human brain also has a lot of neurons. Now, a great difference between the human brain and the brains of other organisms is that the human brain has a cerebrum that is the most highly folded with many grooves in order to pack in more neurons. This adaptation contributes to the high level of cognitive ability and intelligence of a human being compared to other organisms. Our human brains are truly the miracle working organs that act as the command and control centers of the body. Let's find out more about the functions and parts of the human brain. The learning outcomes for this lesson are as follows. After the lesson, you should be able to state the role of the nervous system, and secondly, be able to draw and label a diagram of the organization of the nervous system. Thirdly, be able to name and label the main parts of the brain and state their functions. Let us answer this question or learning outcome. State the role of the nervous system. So generally, the role of the nervous system is to control and coordinate the functions in the body. To coordinate means to combine all the activities together so that they run smoothly to produce a desired result. To carry out coordination, the nervous system first receives information from receptors. When these receptors are stimulated by changes in the environment and detect the stimuli, then impulses are produced. Okay, for example, receptors in the eyes, ears and nose will detect different stimuli and then produce the impulses which are transmitted to the brain. So these impulses actually carry information about the surroundings, and when the brain receives these impulses via the nerves, it will interpret the information in order to find out what it is. And then the brain will formulate responses to be sent to effectors such as muscles and glands, so that we can respond to the changes in the environment, whether it's internal or external environment. So other than that, the nervous system helps to maintain homeostasis, meaning the maintenance of a constant internal environment. For example, in the control or regulation of body temperature. So the nervous system is involved to help us maintain a constant body temperature within the range of the optimum level. Let us discuss the organization of the human nervous system. What is the nervous system made up of? Well, the nervous system is actually a complex network of nerves, that is the neurons and their fibres, that carry messages in the form of electrical impulses between the brain and spinal cord and the various parts of the body. It is a very well organized system. Now, the nervous system can be divided into two main parts: the central nervous system or CNS and the peripheral nervous system or PNS. Now, the central nervous system or CNS functions as the control center of the body, controls the various activities going on in the body, and it comprises the brain and the spinal cord. As we know, the brain is the commander of the whole body. Okay, so the central nervous system controls the activities in the body. And the brain and spinal cord are found in the center part of the body, right? Now, the peripheral nervous system is the other system. Peripheral means it's at the side or the edge of the, and not in the center. In Malay, we say di pinggir, right? Now, the peripheral nervous system functions to transmit impulses from the receptors in the sense organs, like the eyes, the ears, and also receptors within the body, to the central nervous system, to the brain and spinal cord. And from the central nervous system, the peripheral nervous system transmits the impulses to the effectors, such as muscles or glands, so that a response can be produced towards a stimulus. So the peripheral nervous system consists of the cranial nerves and the spinal nerves. Cranial nerves arise from the brain, emerge from the brain in the head. Spinal nerves arise from the spinal cord below the brain. Okay, so the word cranial comes from the word cranium, meaning the part of the skull that protects the brain. So cranial nerves transmit impulses between the brain and the receptors, and also between the brain and the effectors, okay, in the head, in the region of the head. Whereas spinal nerves, they transmit impulses between the CNS, the brain and spinal cord, and the lower parts of the body, like the arms and the legs, and the parts below the brain, okay. So here's a picture of the nervous system, and it's a simplified picture. So we can see that the central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord in the center part of the body. Peripheral nervous system consists of the cranial nerves arising from the brain and the spinal nerves arising from the spinal cord. Now this view is the dorsal view, or the back view, where we can see the back part of the body plus the buttocks and so forth. The opposite of the dorsal view is the ventral view, where you see a person from the front, you see the face. That's the ventral view. Right, so from this dorsal view, we can see the brain, the parts of the brain from the dorsal view. And it consists of, the brain consists of the cerebrum, this big part here, which is divided into two hemispheres, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere. Okay, and below the cerebrum of the brain, there is the cerebellum. Here, below the cerebellum is the medulla oblongata, and below medulla oblongata is the spinal cord. Okay, so the cerebrum, cerebellum, and medulla oblongata are all parts of the brain. Now let's look at the cranial nerves. They arise or emerge from the brain. So they will connect the brain to the various receptors, for example, in the eyes, ears, nose, okay, and also connect the brain to the various effectors, like the muscles in the head, in the region here. Okay, so cranial comes from the word cranium, which means the skull, the part of the skull that protects the brain. Now below the cranial nerves, we have many pairs on the left side, right side, many pairs of spinal nerves that arise from the spinal cord. So these nerves connect the receptors and effectors in the hands and legs and the lower part of the body to the central nervous system, to the spinal cord and the brain. Let us now study the interesting structure and functions of the various parts of the brain. So the human brain can be divided into three main parts: the cerebrum, cerebellum, and medulla oblongata. Okay, now let's look at the cerebrum. So it looks like a big mushroom here. Okay, and the cerebellum, it looks like a smaller mushroom at the side. That's just for you to compare. Of course, you cannot write big mushroom, small mushroom in the exam. Now, the cerebrum, what is the structure like? So it has a lot of folds, as you can see here. It is highly folded. Folds means the lipatan. And This is an adaptation. The folds are an adaptation to increase the total surface area of the cerebrum so that it can contain more neurons for more efficient functioning of the human brain. Okay, the other animal that has also got a lot of folds and resembles our brain is the dolphin, which is also a highly intelligent animal. And most organisms, they don't have so many folds. Some have very few folds. For example, the rabbit and the rat. Their brains have very few folds. All right. So the more folds there is, the higher the level of intelligence of the organism. Now let's talk about the function of the cerebrum. Very important for objective questions and structured questions. You must know the functions of various parts of the brain. Now, firstly, the cerebrum. It is the site of intelligence, and it's where the mental processes occur, especially in the front part here. That's why it's so prominent. It shows that we humans are thinking creatures. We think a lot, all right? That's why this part of the brain is so well developed. So it carries out various complex mental processes, such as remembering, for memory, learning, making judgments, okay, analytical thinking, mathematical skills. All are due to the activities of the cerebrum. Okay, the cerebrum will control all that. And also the cerebrum controls the contraction of the skeletal muscles that are attached to the bones. In that way, the cerebrum controls voluntary actions such as running, writing, talking, and so forth. Okay, and these voluntary actions means the actions that are controlled by the conscious thoughts or mind and controlled by the will. You can decide when you want to talk, when you don't want to talk. Okay, so cerebrum controls voluntary activities or actions. Now let's go on to the cerebellum. Cerebellum sounds a bit like cerebrum. So to remember the difference, where it's located, the cerebrum is on top, cerebellum is below. You think of this word, cerebellum, sounds like below. So the cerebellum is below the cerebrum. Now, another use of this word cerebellum, it sounds like balance. So cerebellum controls the balance of the body. And it also controls the coordination of movements or contraction of muscles, so that our body parts are well coordinated when we move. So cerebellum is for balance and coordination. Okay. Now, medulla oblongata is the third part of the brain. It is just next to the spinal cord, and it is below this swollen part here. This swollen part is not the medulla oblongata. It's called the pons, and the medulla oblongata is below that. Just a small section here. So pons and medulla oblongata make up the brainstem. What's the function of the medulla oblongata? Think of two words here. It controls involuntary actions. So involuntary actions are those actions that cannot be controlled by the conscious thought or the will of a person. Example is the heartbeat. We can't control our heartbeat with our conscious mind. Can't tell it to stop or beat faster. But it's actually controlled. The heartbeat is controlled by the part of the brain here called the medulla oblongata. Okay. So other than heartbeat, other involuntary actions are like coughing, sneezing, blinking your eyes when dust tries to get in, or dust is getting to your eyes, you will blink your eyes. Okay, that is an involuntary action, and some of these involuntary actions are meant to protect us from harm. Okay. Now next, we have two other parts that we have to study. The first is the hypothalamus first. So the hypothalamus is a region, a small region, just somewhere below the cerebrum here, below the big part of the cerebrum. So the word hypothalamus comes from two words. Hypo meaning under, and thalamus. Now the thalamus is a region of the brain above here. So the hypothalamus is below it, that's why it's called hypothalamus. Please don't write hippopotamus or connect it with that. Hypothalamus. Now, it controls body temperature and also the blood osmotic pressure. So it's very important to the body. And Blood osmotic pressure means the balance of water and salts in the blood, which we will study later on. Okay, so hypothalamus is also the center for sleep and thirst and so forth. Pituitary gland, okay, this is the last part, is just below, nearby to the hypothalamus. It's the neighbor of the hypothalamus because they do work together, right? Now, the pituitary gland is an endocrine gland, meaning that it secretes hormones. Okay, so it secretes many hormones that help to regulate the functioning of the body. We will study that later. But the main question that comes up about pituitary gland is, why is pituitary gland called the master gland? It's the master of all the endocrine glands. That's because it secretes hormones to control the secretion of hormones from the other endocrine glands. So it controls the other endocrine glands by secreting hormones, okay, to control their function. So the 5 parts of the human brain that you must know: cerebrum, cerebellum, medulla oblongata, pituitary gland, and hypothalamus. These are the notes for what we discussed just now, the brain parts and the functions, the structure and functions. So we'll go through it very quickly, and you can jot down these notes if you need to into your notebook. The cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, divided into right and left hemisphere. Right side controls the activities on the left side of the body, whereas the left side controls the activities on the right side of the body. So they control the opposite parts of the body from where they are situated. Now, the folds and grooves on the surface of cerebrum are to increase the surface area of the cerebrum so that they can increase the number of neurons in the brain, in the cerebrum, for more efficient functioning of the brain. So this is an important point. And the function of the cerebrum are, it interprets information from receptors, is the site of intelligence, and carries out complex mental processes such as learning, making judgments, remembering, writing, speech. When you speak, you are using the cerebrum. Mathematical skills, when you do maths, you are using your cerebrum. And also conscious thought, when you're thinking and you are conscious of what you're thinking. All that's because of the cerebrum. Now, it also controls contraction of skeletal muscles for voluntary actions. So all voluntary actions that we carry out are controlled by the cerebrum. Cerebellum coordinates movement and contraction of muscles and controls balance to produce precise movements. Okay, bellum, think of balance. Next, we have the medulla oblongata, which we have discussed just now. So it controls involuntary actions of the body, such as breathing, heartbeat, blood circulation, and it controls some reflexes of fast automatic responses. Okay, a reflex is a fast automatic response that occurs without thinking because it's controlled by medulla oblongata, the part that is working subconsciously or unconsciously, okay, in our body. So the reflexes are, for example, sneezing. For example, if you breathe in some dust, you may just start to sneeze. Swallowing, coughing, blinking. If some dust gets into your eye, you blink very quickly. Okay. Now, number 4, the hypothalamus is the control center for temperature, water balance, or blood osmotic pressure in the body, recognition and analysis of hunger, fatigue, and anger. So it controls coordination of nervous and endocrine systems. So it helps both of them to work together. Just now we discussed the function of medulla oblongata and cerebrum. Cerebrum controls voluntary actions. Medulla oblongata controls the involuntary actions. So here's the definition for them. A voluntary action is an action that is controlled by the conscious thought and free will of a person, such as running, talking, eating, riding a bicycle. So the control center is the cerebrum here. And we are aware of it when we do it. We can control the action. Involuntary action is an action that's not controlled by the conscious thought and free will, just the opposite of voluntary actions. So here are the various examples that we have to know. Peristalsis, what's the meaning of that? Okay, peristalsis is the contraction and relaxation of smooth muscles. For example, the smooth muscles in the wall of the esophagus, okay, that connects the mouth with the stomach. So if we eat some food and it goes down into the esophagus here, it's not going to get stuck usually, because the muscles above the food will contract and try to push the food down into our stomach. Okay, so that's peristalsis, the contraction and relaxation of the smooth muscles in order to move the food in the alimentary canal. Okay, as an example. Vomiting, coughing, sneezing, heartbeat, all this cannot be controlled by the conscious thought. Swallowing, breathing, sneezing, blinking, knee-jerk reaction. Okay, so controlled by the medulla oblongata. All these involuntary actions are controlled by medulla oblongata. The last part of the brain that we have to know is the pituitary gland. Pituitary gland is located just below the hypothalamus, and it's called the master gland because it secretes hormones to control the secretion of other hormones by other endocrine glands. So this is a past year question, so try and memorize this. Why is pituitary gland called the master gland? Finally, let's look at some parts of the human brain that have different functions. We call them the lobes, actually, L-O-B-E-S. But here we are just going to generally go through some of these parts. Okay, sometimes it does come out in the exam. So firstly, this section here, this is a side view of the brain. So as we know, the front end here, the frontal lobe here, okay, carries out the mental processes such as memorizing, thinking, reasoning, speaking, and so forth. Mental processes, it's for mental processes. Now here there are two areas that are quite broad and extends from the top to the bottom here. The first one on the left is the motor area, which controls voluntary movement caused by the contraction of skeletal muscles. When you move your arms and your legs, like walking or even running and so forth. As long as you move the parts of your body, and it is controlled by the conscious thought and will, then it is controlled by this area called the motor area. Motor has to do with movement. Sensory area interprets stimulus such as touch from sensory organs. Okay, now the visual area or center controls sight and helps us to interpret what we see. Okay, so if a person has an accident and damages this part of his brain, then he will not be able to interpret what he sees and he may have a problem with his sight. Okay, now auditory center is found here and it helps us to hear. Okay, and under this part of the cerebrum, okay, under this frontal lobe, there is an olfactory lobe. Olfactory has to do with smelling. So it helps us to smell things and interprets the various smells. Okay, so that's all for this part of the video, and in the next video we'll discuss the spinal cord and also the types of neurons. So see you then.